Today's tutorial is going to be for the Taylor Tote from Moremeknow. This will be my first time sewing this tote and I'm super excited. I've picked adorable prints and I'm really looking forward to sewing up just a fun bag that I'm probably going to steal and keep for myself. Included in this pattern is two options for the exterior and two different options for the interior that you can mix and match together. The designer has created 7 different videos for this, going over the cutting, going over the various options, and even a clear vinyl version. During her videos, she gives you tips and ideas for different things you can do with this pattern. It's a really versatile pattern and has a great shape. In today's video, I'm using a cotton woven from the Emporium, webbing from the Emporium, and I'm going to be using jelly from the Emporium. My lining will be from J&R Edwards, sewing string from Wizardry, and zipper tape from Sew Majestic. I'm definitely doing a couple things different in this pattern, so as we go along I'll point out what I'm doing different. Everything that I have cut out I have interfaced with the SF101. On my exterior pieces, I did add a layer of foam. It is fusible and I kept it out of the seam allowance. On the base piece, I did add not only the foam, but Decaville Heavy just for a little bit extra support. So let's go ahead and get started sewing up the Taylor Tote. To get this pattern started, I'm going to be working on the front pocket. For my slip pocket, I'm going to be using this piece of jelly, which is different than the pattern. The pattern has you cut out 2 pieces and you sew them right sides together. So therefore, the seam allowance is in that pattern piece, and I'm not using that seam allowance because I only have 1 piece of jelly. I did take the seam allowance out of this pattern piece, so I cut mine a little bit smaller. I don't need to do anything as far as decorative trim on the top and the bottom. Since jelly is a non-fraying material, I could just leave it like this and sew it on there, but I wanted it to be just a little bit cuter and have just a little bit more of a finished look. So I have 2 pieces of fold over elastic. This is just a 1 inch. I'm going to sew a piece at the top and a piece at the bottom. The piece at the bottom, I'm only going to top stitch across the very top, about 1/8 of an inch away from that top edge. Whenever I attach it to the main panel, then I will top stitch across the bottom to attach it to the main panel piece. But on this top piece, since I won't be attaching it, I'm going to sew both the top and the bottom 1/8 of an inch away from each side of this fold over elastic. I sewed across both ends at the top and only the top end at the bottom. I marked my center on both this slip pocket and on this main panel piece. The pattern tells us how far up from the bottom from that center mark we're going to place this slip pocket. So it's going to be centered and then a little bit up from the bottom. So I have the pocket placed correctly. Now what I need to do is I need to go ahead and sew around the sides and the bottom to have this secured. I'm just going to sew 1/8 of an inch all the way around. The sides are going to be basting stitches and it's going to be hidden by the webbing or your handles, but the bottom will be seen and it will be considered a top stitch, so just take care when sewing it. Now that I have the slip pocket on, it's time to add the handles. I'm going to have my handle exactly like the pattern says, and that's going to be kind of like a faux rolled handle. So the first thing you do is you find the center of your webbing, then you measure out from the center on each side. The pattern tells you how many inches to measure out. I start at the end, so this is the first end I'm doing, and then I'm just going to fold these 2 edges together, the long edges. Now my webbing is the same on either side, so it doesn't matter, but if yours is different, you would be sewing wrong sides together so that your right side, the pretty side, would be facing out. I'm going to clip all the way down this long edge, folding this webbing in half until I get to the other mark, or in my case, the other clip on the other side. This is how that rolled handle will look. And so what you'll do now is you're just going to start sewing here where the folded edge is, and you will back stitch and then sew about 1/8 of an inch all the way down to the other side. So I just need to back stitch when I start and stop and sew between the two clipped areas. You can double check to make sure yours is pretty even and that the clips are matching up so that you start and stop at the same spot on both sides. Now that I have my rolled handles made, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the pattern measurements as to how to place them. We have this edge flush at the bottom and then we overlap it. And she does tell us that we have a little bit of freedom here as to how much we want to overlap. So I'm clipping those raw edges at the bottom. I'm going to make for sure I do not twist this. Come across the other side. Even though I'm kind of eyeballing it and figuring out it's looking pretty good, I am going to measure all along this to make sure I'm having it an even distance from this side. And then I'm going to use a little bit of glue just to kind of hold it in place so while I'm sewing it doesn't shift. You could use double-sided tape, you could use stick pins, whatever you want to help you just to make for sure you do get this part straight, because the webbing, this step will be really noticeable when you look at your bag. The pattern also tells us where to stop sewing. You'll measure from the bottom and it tells you how far up to stop sewing. You can sew just a straight line across, you can sew a box, you could sew 2 lines if you want. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go off camera, get everything measured and glued down, and then I'm just going to sew up one side, across, and then down the other. That will finish this front panel piece. I'll repeat the same steps for my other panel, for the back panel, and then that will have both of our main front and back panels completed. Once we have our slip pocket and our handles attached, now we're going to go ahead and finish up this front and back piece by adding the upper main panel. You're going to cut out 4 of these, and the pattern does tell you that you're using a cotton woven. Go ahead and interface with the SF101, and if you're using a vinyl or a woven, add the stabilizer, and there's a separate pattern piece or measurements for the stabilizer that you want to attach. With this piece, you can cut a contrast if you want to have a pop of color here at the top. For me, since this is going to be a recessed zipper, I'm deciding that when you look at the top of the bag looking down into it, you're just going to see the same exterior print. So on your front and back, pull out this panel piece, and then you're just going to have it orientated the way you want it to go. If it's directional, simply flip it down the bottom of your upper panel, the top of this main panel. It should fit perfectly, and you're just going to sew from one edge to the other with the seam allowance given in the pattern. The designer does tell us that if you have that stabilizer placed properly, you should be sewing like right up against it, but not through it. Now what you want to do is you want to push that seam allowance down and let this upper panel flip up. We are going to top stitch that seam down onto this main panel. We are not top stitching on that upper band piece. And I'm just going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from that folded edge or that edge we just sewed to tack that seam down. We will do the same step to the back piece. You're also going to sew this onto the lining, but don't sew it yet because we'll have to sandwich in that recess zipper before we attach this. To create the gusset for this bag, we're going to have 3 pieces, 2 sides and 1 bottom piece. On the side pieces, I just have the foam out of the seam allowance, but on that base, like I said, I do have Decaville Heavy and foam, just to give it a little bit extra of strength there, since that's going to be the main support. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this short edge of the base right sides together with this short edge of the side panel, and I'm going to sew this together with the seam allowance given in the pattern. I love to butterfly seams open. The pattern doesn't say to butterfly the seam, but I really want to, so I'm going to go ahead and butterfly this seam open and top stitch down both sides. I'll top stitch from the exterior just so I can make for sure I can see what I'm doing, get it straight. But I'll use my fingers to keep checking that that seam stays open. After you have the gusset sewed, you are going to attach your D-ring or your connector. For me, I'm just using a piece of webbing. I'm choosing to use 1-inch webbing. On my handles, I used 1.5-inch webbing, but for this, I'm going to use 1 inch, and I do have a D-ring on there, and I have it folded in half. I found the center of the top of this gusset piece on the side, and then I'm going to add my connector on there, but I'm going to leave a little bit of overhang just to help with integrity. And then I'm simply going to baste this in place 1/8 of an inch away. After you have that D-ring basted into place, you're going to pull out, I believe this is called my upper side panel, and this is the lower side panel. But this upper side panel is going to be placed right sides together. Make sure you're going to be sewing across the bottom if your print's directional. You just place them right sides together, and then you sew with the seam allowance given in the pattern, which once again should be against your inner facing but not through it. After you sew that, we are going to push that seam down so that our D-ring connector will go up. And then we're going to top stitch across that edge on this lower side piece, or the lower gusset piece, not for sure the name of that. But you're just going to sew 1/8 of an inch away. That'll tack down the seam, but also the bottom of your D-ring connector. If you wanted to add a rivet in place here, you could do that if you wanted a little extra security, or if you just like the way it looks. I'm going to repeat those same steps on the other side to add the other D-ring connector, and this will be for your crossbody or shoulder strap. You're going to do the same thing with your lining, except you will not be adding a D-ring connector, but you'll be adding all the other pieces. I'm going to go off camera and I'm going to find my center marks on the base and also the center marks on my front and back main panel. I will clip the front all together, and then I'll come back and show you how this gusset looks when it's clipped to that front main panel, and then we'll sew it together. Anyway, what I have now is I have the gusset clipped onto that front panel all the way around. Now the designer tells you will need to make tiny snips into the curves of the gusset. Mine fit perfectly, which means I probably did something wrong. But just note, if your gusset is not fitting and is struggling, just make the tiny snips so that it will be sewn on perfectly. Use the seam allowance given the pattern, start at the top, and then let's just go all the way around to the other side. I have the gusset sewn onto the front, and now what I'm going to do is repeat those same steps to sew it onto the back. I have my exterior completely done. Everything looks great on it. I'm going to set this aside and we're going to start working on the lining. So here is my lining main piece. Here's the piece I'm going to use for a slip pocket. I had only a little bit of this fabric left after making the exterior for the bag. So what I did was I just took what I had left, cut it in half, and here we are going to make a slip pocket out of it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it right sides together, and then I want this to actually be the top of the slip pocket. I don't want it long as I do wide, and so I'm going to sew a little bit here, back stitch, break my stitches, and then come over here and sew the rest of the way. This will end up being my top or the bottom. After I sew it, I'll just trim the corners, the extra bulk there, turn it right sides out, give it a press, and top stitch, and then add it to the lining main panel. Here is how it looks after it's been sewn and the edge is trimmed. I'm just going to reach inside here, turn it right sides out. You want to roll your seams out. Now you can just do this and finger press. But after you do that, you're going to just tuck in those raw edges to have it even as well. I typically will go ahead and top stitch this part closed and let that actually be the top of the pocket, but I think with this print, it's looking like it would look better if that was the bottom and this was the top, just the way the print is being orientated. So I'm going to do that. Some top stitching across here. Mark your centers on both your slip pocket and your panel piece. Line them up, and then I'm just going to sew from this top side down over, which will close up the opening, and up the other side. Here is how my simple slip pocket looks. Super easy. I'm going to repeat it on the other side, trim up my threads. And I added both slip pockets to my lining pieces, so that is complete. I did go ahead and sew up the gusset the exact same way I sewed up the exterior gusset, except there's no D-rings here. Also, you can see that that's a different print, and that is because this part will be visible from the outside when the zipper is closed, and so I did want it to look all the same on the outside on the exterior. Before I can attach this gusset to the lining panels, I have to add that top upper band, but before I can do that, I have to do the recessed zipper. So let's go ahead and pull out the pieces we're going to use to complete that recessed zipper. I have 4 pieces that I'm going to use to make that recessed zipper. 2 exterior and 2 lining, and then I also have my zipper tape and I have my ends turned down 90 degrees. This will be the lining, this will be the exterior. You will see these pieces from the outside when you're looking down at the bag. Each of these pieces is a cotton woven, and I have each of them interfaced with the SF101. The designer tells us we can add an extra layer of stabilizer on there, keep out the seam allowance. You actually have a pattern piece for it or measurements. I didn't do that. I think it'll be okay just to have this part just kept with the SF101 for my bag. But on the back, the designer does tell us to make a line on each short edge of all 4 of these pieces. What you're going to do is you're going to fold then this raw edge to that line, and you can use double-sided tape here, but I'm just going to use a glue stick and I'm going to press all of these to that line so that we have a finished edge on each side, and then we will go on to the next steps for creating this recessed zipper. Now that I have these short edges all folded under and everything has a nice finished edge, I will pull out one of the lining pieces and have it right sides up. I will use the pattern instructions as to where to place this zipper tape along that top edge, and then I'm just going to baste this into place. You do not have to baste it in place. You could do a traditional zipper sandwich without basting. I just do it because I tend to have problems with things shifting, and I hate using clips, so this is just easier for me. Here is how that looks, and so now I take one of the exterior pieces and I just place it right sides together, matching up this folded edge. And now what I want to do is I'm going to sew from one end all the way to the other with the full seam allowance. Once you have that sewn together, you are just going to flip these 2 pieces back so that they are wrong sides together. I'm going to match up those folded edge as best I can, put a clip here, and then clip down this raw unfinished edge. I'm going to baste down this raw edge first, and then I'm going to continue sewing all the way around, even the finished edges on the short ends, and then top stitch all along here. Just have this completely sewn together. This is how the first side looks. I'm going to repeat that with the other side. Now I usually keep everything together while I'm doing the recessed zipper, but then whenever I'm adding it to the lining, I usually separate my zipper tape. So you could keep it together or separate it now, whichever is easier for you. I have my recessed zipper complete. I do not have a pull or a zipper end yet. I'm not worried about that, but I do have the centers marked. I also pulled out one of my lining main panels. I do not have that top band added yet, but I have the center marked. I have my lining panel right sides up. I'm going to lay my recessed zipper on top right sides up and just match up those centers and clip. I'm going to double check with the ruler. I can already see I need to shift mine down a little. Even though I had the centers marked, I didn't do a very good job, obviously. So I'm going to make for sure I have it exactly centered, and then I'm going to base this in place. Once you have that recessed zipper panel basted in place, go ahead and pull out one of your top bands, and just like we did with the exterior, go ahead and flip it down so it's right sides together, and you are going to sew all across the top with the full seam allowance. So you're sewing through 3 pieces: this top band, the lining main, and your recessed zipper. Now that I have those 3 pieces sewn together, I'm going to top stitch. The way you top stitch this will determine how the zipper lays, the recessed zipper lays. So if you leave that seam up and you just lay the top band on top of that seam and top stitch on the top band, your zipper, recessed zipper is going to sit a little down. If instead you flip that seam under and top stitch there, the recessed zipper will be a little bit lifted. It'll lay a little higher. So I think it's kind of a personal preference there. I prefer mine to kind of sit down. So I am going to top stitch on the top band piece, and my seam will be going up. So this is how it looks. Everything is coming together perfectly. I'm going to repeat those same steps to attach this other end of the recessed zipper to the other lining panel. After that, I'm going to add the gusset the exact same way I did the exterior. I'm choosing to do this as a drop-in, and that's going to be great because I don't have a zipper pocket. If you wanted to do this as a birth bag, you would either need to make a zipper pocket or leave an opening, probably on the side, since the base on the gusset's kind of small. Those are some options, but I'm just going to do this as a drop-in. So once I get everything completed with the lining, I'll come back and show you how to handle that drop in as the very last step that we'll be doing. I have my lining finished. I have it turned wrong side out, and what I did was I used the instructions in the pattern to know how far down to fold the raw edge of this top band. It is given there. And so now I have a finished edge here along the top. I just have clips in place, but you could use double-sided tape or glue or whatever. My exterior, I have turned right sides out, but I have the same thing. I have these raw edges clipped under all the way around according to that pattern measurement given. Now all I have to do is simply slide my lining in to this bag. My exterior front and back look the same, so it doesn't really matter too much. If you want to kind of look and see which one looks a little bit better, but both of mine look pretty much the same, so I'm not too worried about it. If yours does look different, and if you have a definite front and back, make sure you note that for how you put in your zipper, because you may have a preference as to how your zipper closes. I'm just going to drop this lining inside. I'm going to match up my seams, and then I'm going to clip all the way around. Everything should fit in nicely at this point. I personally want my lining just a shade lower, maybe a 1/16 of an inch lower than my exterior. That way while sewing, I don't have to worry about any risk of the lining peeking through after I have it sewn together and I'm looking at it from the outside. I have everything clipped around. I love the drop-in lining. You get to control how everything looks before you even sew it to make sure it just looks exactly the way you want it to. So now it's perfect for me to sew all around this top edge with a top stitch, connecting the two and making sure I do it beautifully. I am though going to go ahead and switch my exterior so that it is the inside. So that way when I'm top stitching, since I have a flatbed machine, I'll be top stitching on the exterior. You don't have to do that. It's just I know how I sew, and my top stitching would look a hot mess if I did not do that step. So I'm going to flip this inside out, sew it, and then I'll flip it back again. So now I can sew from the exterior all the way around. If you see, or for me, if I see any of my lining poking up, I'm going to fix it so that I don't see it. I only want to be looking at the exterior whenever I look at the outside of the bag, just a personal preference on that. And so I'm just going to sew 1/8 of an inch around, all the way around the perimeter of this bag. I am going to turn this bag right sides out now that I've got everything top stitched. I'm also going to add my zipper pull and a zipper tab. Now for me, the zipper tab, I'm just going to use a scrap piece of vinyl. I keep squares of vinyl in a bag, so whenever I need to grab one for a zipper tab, I can do that. And then I'm just going to top stitch that on. And then when I come back, we're just going to look at how amazing this bag turned out. My Taylor Tote is completely done, and oh my gosh, this bag is gorgeous. I did not expect to love this size so much. I'm not a huge fan of big bags, but the shape, the structure, the way this one comes together, I love everything about it. It is definitely a great bag to be able to use. I think Lauren uses hers for a work bag, and I think that's a great idea. I'm actually making this one more as a travel bag. I'm going out of town here in a couple weeks, and I wanted something new, and I definitely think I'm keeping this one for myself because I just love it, and I think I can find so many ways to kind of help me on that trip. I did make a shoulder strap, and it was just a quick, simple one. Let's just look inside. You can see I do have the slip pocket here. I have the connectors on the side. We have that gorgeous recessed zipper. That is beautiful. Keeps everything really nice. I love the shape. It's just kind of square and boxy. I did keep my very simple just slip pockets because that's what I use and that's what I wanted. Love it. Everything is great in here, and this is going to hold a lot of stuff and just be such a useful bag. My materials, the exterior, the webbing, the jelly vinyl, are all from the Emporium. I'll have the website, Facebook group, all that linked. The lining, the watercolor print inside, the tie-dye print inside is from J.R. Edwards. Zipper tape is from So Majestic, and this pattern is from Moremeknow, and I will have the link for it as well in the description. So if you don't have this pattern, definitely check it out. If you like the materials, go and look at the Emporium's materials. She does mostly pre-orders, but occasionally has retail available as well. Thanks again for watching another tutorial of mine. I hope today in your sewing room that you try out a new pattern that surprises you with how much you love the shape and how useful and big it is. Even if you're someone that doesn't like big bags so much, I think this is one you would like. Thanks for spending the day with me, and I hope you have an amazing day today.